Well, in the past 6 months, MTN has lost 1 million prepaid customers. Its chief executive telling TechCentral that government's delays in issuing what they call a final policy on high-demand radio frequency spectrum, don't panic, I don't know what it is either, has started affecting the quality of its local network. Oh, so it's government's fault and not the networks for your dropped calls. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight we're joined by Steven Ambrose, the managing director at StrategyWorx Consulting, and also Richard Hurst, who's a senior analyst at Ovum, to find out whether or not MTN is posing a good investment opportunity. High-level numbers. Give me a sense of the quality of the numbers. 9% growth for MTN. This is a business which is surprisingly still growing relatively strongly in quite tough economies.
I would say essentially there are two stories here. One is the SA story, and the other one is the emerging markets. And the emerging market story is the good growth opportunity there. Whereas at home, increased competition, regulatory pressure are coming to roost.
What does it look like in South Africa then, Steven Ambrose? I mean, we look at the South African market where Cell C is undercutting almost itself on a weekly basis and making the Vodacom and MTN lives, about time too, quite unpleasant.
Well, it's actually really interesting. Voice has peaked. There's no question that the great revenue driver of the past 20 years, voice, has peaked. SMS has flattened, and the big story is data. And there's no question as well that the market is mature. We've now got more connections than human beings in the country. And it's a very different place to the emerging markets. Margins are under pressure. The companies have to be a lot more nimble in order to make revenue and make profits. And it appears of the majors, which is Vodacom and MTN are being a little less nimble because the Vodacom results showed a slightly better picture. But definitely in South Africa, their revenues are down, partially due to the MTR cuts.
It's interesting that you say it, though. I mean, Richard, here we've got a situation where MTN and Vodacom, established for the last 20 years, MTN has been the most nimble in terms of its Pan-African, Middle East strategies. We see MTN as the dynamic player. Steven Ambrose says they're less dynamic.
I definitely agree with Stephen when it comes to our local market. When I look at the South African environment, I think they're by their own admission, they've been slow to react to all these price wars which have been initiated. But having said that, it should be that the larger players should be able to sustain that price war and really take a big hammer to their competition.
Well, they've lost 1 million prepaid customers, which suggests one of two things. Either their customers have abandoned them in droves and gone to the cheaper offerings, because in that prepaid market, it doesn't matter whose SIM card you got stuck in your phone as long as it works. And the other part of the argument, of course, is some of their network services are so appalling that people are abandoning them on that particular basis. They're blaming government for a lack of policy in terms of the quality of their network. What is the truth?
I think the real truth is that the prepaid consumer tends to be a more cost-conscious consumer, and therefore they're going, like lemmings, wherever the cheapest option is. And right now, as we mentioned, Cell C and Vodacom are playing to that, as well as Telkom Mobile to a lesser degree. But MTN are not reacting in the appropriate manner. In terms of network, well, we can blame government all we want. But the fact is that it's their network. They should be provisioning. They should know how many subscribers are going to be on, what the load is on their network, that type of thing.
We've seen loads increase dramatically over recent years, Stephen. Has the investment in the network been adequate to sustain a decent enough level of service?
I think at the root cause, there's no question that they can and rightfully do blame government for the current situation with spectrum. Now, you mentioned spectrum. The simple fact is spectrum is finite. You can only do so much on a particular spectrum with the technologies that currently exist. LTE, which you mentioned earlier, improves the situation on the data front slightly. But the fact is that both MTN, Vodacom and Cell C are struggling to get sufficient spectrum to be able to roll out sufficient network capacity in order to meet our demand. So I don't think that there's a particular investment problem. I think the challenge in South Africa really is down to a slightly less friendly, business-friendly regulatory environment.
Is it less business-friendly or just rubbish?
Well, okay, let's be direct. It's rubbish.
Okay, but that's the point, isn't it?
There's
the
no
regulatory
question-
framework has been inadequate
Well,
to sustain
it
this
doesn't
industry.
exist. That's the problem. The regulatory framework has been promised. ICAS has offered lots of panacea. We're investigating this, we're going to do that. They jumped the gun on the whole MTR issue earlier this year.
Mobile termination rates.
Correct.
Yeah.
They got knocked back by the courts. Next month, we're going to see a completely revised regime, apparently. The fact is the consumer has scored. Data costs have come down dramatically. Voice costs are probably as low as they're going to get for the next little while, because you cannot go much below 50 cents per second billing per minute that Cell CE is offering. MTN, interestingly, in the second quarter of this year, really woke up and started getting a little bit nimble and a little bit aggressive, dropped their prices to 79 cents.
But that's not reflected in these results.
No,
These
it is reflected. Interestingly.
Is it?
It is reflected in the results. Their first quarter, they lost 1 million subscribers. And the second quarter, they clawed back about
so it is paying
300 or
off.
400,000. So the minute they reacted, dropped their prices, got rid of the bad publicity, played the consumer friend a little, their prepaid market swung heavily back towards them. The net result is still a loss of close to 500,000 subscribers, which is significant in a mature
But if they
market.
continue this game, they may very well.
They may recover a lot over the next 2 quarters. I have no doubt.
Stephen used lots of acronyms. LTE. What is the fuss over LTE? I went overseas, I came back, and I got 3 little letters on my phone which are LTE. Essentially, it's 4G. I got terribly excited, and then I looked at my phone and I waited for it to do something interesting. And as far as I'm concerned, it's rubbish. Is it?
No, not by a long shot. LTE, long-term evolution. It promises greater throughput, i.e. speeds for your connections and data, etc.
Am I just a spoiled brat that I haven't noticed this?
Well, as Stephen said, it's such a better connection that probably you haven't noticed it. And it is a better connection. But jumping back to the debate around spectrum, the operators are looking for their 4G spectrum. That's the real key for them right now.
But that's LTE, right? So
Yes.
this is
Not entirely.
okay.
It's not only LTE. The challenge around spectrum is, as I said, it's a finite resource. You can only do so much with what you've been given. The benefit of LTE is not only the fact that it's faster, it's actually much more spectrally efficient. So you can get more people onto the same spectrum.
Squeeze more people into the pipe, if you like.
At higher speed onto the pipe than you could with 3G.
I mean, what am I meant to do with this LTE thing? I mean,
Surf the web faster.
but it doesn't work.
No, it does. I must admit.
So
In
how can
all
I-
the trials that
is
I've
it-
done,
is it possible for me to
works
test
extremely
it for myself? 'Cause
Yes.
I don't feel like I've got a benefit.
Download a little app called Speed Test and do a speed test. Put your phone on 3G, you'll get about between 5 and 7 megabytes per second download.
Yeah.
Put it onto LTE, and certainly in the Sandton area, you'll start at 15 to 22 megabytes per second. So it's a significant
I
improvement.
don't know if I'm going to bother with that. I might switch the LTE off and see whether or not I
Well,
notice
see if you
a
notice
slowdown.
any difference.
Okay, I'll take that challenge. Somebody very unkindly has said, Richard, that MTN is, and we've been talking about MTN's lack of being able to be nimble in South Africa, that MTN is a remarkable competitor in countries where it has no rivals. Is that fair?
I would say that MTN has also been very good at going into markets where angels fear to tread. Iran, Syria, Yemen, etc.
Are those paying off?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword for them, in that they get the subscribers, but then there tends to be a lower ARPU. The usage of the network is different, so each is different. But it is them spreading their footprint in the emerging markets, and as we all know, the emerging markets is where the real growth opportunity.
That's been the genius of MTN, has been this
No
global,
question.
this sort of Africa-wide diversification. But you almost feel as if they've got to do some more big deals or run the risk of being taken over themselves, Steve.
That seems to be the general consensus out there amongst the analyst community. They are making massive margin in the emerging markets for a simple reason that in those markets, voice is still fairly dominant.
okay.
So
Is voice more profitable than data?
Absolutely. Voice tends to be stable in terms of revenue, it tends to be stable in terms of margin, whereas data is increasing exponentially and the costs are dropping 30-40% per year. So you're locked into a model where people demand more and more and more and are prepared to pay less and less and less. So you're a volume model, which is very difficult to sustain.
But a volume model, you've got to keep investing in infrastructure, you've got to keep investing in equipment, you've got to have a regulatory regime that enables you to broaden your reach.
Absolutely.
And if you're not getting that, then is it worth buying an MTN share? Richard?
I would say even now it's at a premium, but I still think that there's still upside based on the emerging market opportunity that still exists.
What about you, Stephen?
I think that there's no question that MTN and all the operators are trading at a record high, not ARPU, EBITDA. I'm thinking one side and the other
ARPU,
side.
average revenue per user, in case you're interested.
But their EBITDA, especially in the emerging markets, is exceptionally high by global standards.
But that makes them vulnerable, doesn't it, to competition?
Yes, except it's a highly regulated environment. So they have the licenses in these environments. It's hugely capital intensive. So for competition to come in, it's almost impossible to break the lead that MTN has got, let's say, in Nigeria. Plenty have tried, even Telkom tried, and they lost tons of money.
It's a little bit like Cell C in South Africa yapping at the heels of the Rottweiler and the Great Danes that are respectively Vodacom and MTN.
And that's hard, and that's what makes mobile a great investment going forward, in my opinion. There's so much more to come, and the whole data environment in the African context, especially Africa and the emerging markets, is still going to play out. There's going to be massive growth in the usage of data,
but it's the explosion of affordable smartphones. And that's got to be the big revolution of the century. We've seen the African continent lead in so many great technologies using old-fashioned phones. Imagine what's going to happen when mobile phones become affordable at $40, $50 for a cheap smartphone.
Well, you can see we've already tested the $50 mark with a couple of the network operators and their cheap $50 smartphones. And I think they're definitely targeting that. And I think what you'll find is that most of our African experience via the internet is going to be via the mobile device.
It's fascinating. Nice space to watch, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Steven Ambrose, the Managing Director of StrategyWorx Consulting, and Richard Hurst, who's a Senior Analyst at Ovum. Thank you for watching. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow. I'm switching off my LTE and I'll see if it makes a difference. Good night.